But this is the hard part. We are now in the last mile, and the last mile is really, really difficult.
Today on the Daily Scoop podcast from the Scoop News Group, sustaining the Biden administration's progress in cyber. Interviews with Federal CIO Clare Martorana and acting Federal CISO Michael Duffy from CyberTalks. It's Tuesday, November 5th, 2024. Welcome to the Daily Scoop podcast, where you'll hear the latest news and trends facing government leaders. I'm the host of the Daily Scoop podcast, Billy Mitchell. Thanks so much for joining me. Here are today's top headlines. It's Election Day, and while that will bring to a close the pre-election period that was busy for foreign and domestic actors looking to undermine confidence in U.S. elections, the post-election period could be an even bumpier ride, according to some observers. As reported on CyberScoop, federal agencies, state and local election officials, and other experts say they are preparing for a chaotic, disruptive, and messy period between Election Day and inauguration, where foreign nations, domestic political groups, and other bad actors will likely attempt to take advantage of a deeply divided electorate during a uniquely vulnerable time in America's electoral cycle. CyberScoop canvassed a wide range of officials, experts, and observers about the scenarios they are most concerned about during this period and why. And their responses make it clear that states and election officials will have to navigate a wide range of threats to the integrity of the election after voters have had their say. While the degrees of confidence varied, most officials CyberScoop spoke with expressed the view that despite risks and challenges, the American public should feel confident that their votes will be accurately counted in the upcoming elections and officials will be able to determine the winner. You can read more on CyberScoop to hear specifically what experts are looking for in the days to come. In other news, the federal government is continuing to invest in generative AI technology produced by OpenAI, with a handful of agencies recently inking deals to use the enterprise version of the firm's ChatGPT platform. The increased activity comes as policymakers weigh potential concerns with the technology while also trying to exploit its potential benefits. It also shows how OpenAI is developing as an early frontrunner in providing the government with generative AI technologies on both the defense and civilian sides. Federal contract records show that the National Gallery of Art purchased OpenAI licenses earlier this fall. NASA, too, appears to have doubled down on the technology. After beginning tests of OpenAI tools last year, the agency purchased an annual license for ChatGPT Enterprise this past summer. Earlier this fall, the Internal Revenue Service purchased 150 ChatGPT Enterprise licenses for use within the Department of the Treasury through a federal contractor, though it's not clear how many were or have been used. A person familiar with the matter said that the Treasury Department did at one point test ChatGPT among a small user base. The Los Alamos National Laboratory, which also has a research partnership with OpenAI, is also using ChatGPT Enterprise. And on the defense side, the company is entering a limited ChatGPT Enterprise partnership with the Air Force Research Laboratory, which does research and development work with the military service. The partnership will focus on using generative AI to reduce administrative burdens and increase efficiency, experimenting with using the technology to improve access to internal resources and basic coding. For more news at the intersection of the federal government and technology, visit fedscoop.com. Scoop News Group last week hosted its annual CyberTalks event at the Andrew Mellon Auditorium in Washington, D.C., featuring the top cybersecurity officials in the public sector space. Much of the conversation throughout the day focused in on the progress the Biden-Harris administration has made in cybersecurity modernization, how the White House is looking to sustain that, and what comes next. Federal CIO Clare Martorana and acting Federal CISO Michael Duffy joined me for a pair of fireside chats at CyberTalks to discuss that and much more. If you missed the event, you're in luck, because today we're revisiting those conversations in their entirety on the Daily Scoop podcast. Well, this is Clare Martorana, your federal CIO, and we're going to talk a bit about how we're looking to sustain the progress that this administration has made around its cyber momentum. And before we really get into the actions we're going to take to sustain that, I think it's good to start back at the beginning. 2021, the Biden administration is really new at the time, and pretty quickly out of the gates, Cybersecurity Executive Order 14028 came out and really set a defining tone for this administration in cybersecurity. So let's start there. What were some of the things that came out of that and some of the accomplishments that have been made during the last couple of years?
Yeah, I brought notes today, and I usually don't work off of notes, but in preparing for this, knowing how much was accomplished, starting with 14028 and then followed on by our zero trust strategy, secure software, on and on and on. I wanted to share some of the key components. So as most of you know, 14028 just was met the moment that we were in when the Biden-Harris administration began, right? We were right in the middle of SolarWinds. It was a really challenging time for us across the ecosystem. But I think that seeing the progress that every federal agency has made, our small and micro agencies, all the way up to our 24 CFO Act agencies, it's been an astounding amount of work. But it has only been accomplished because of the partnership with the private sector, right? We have extraordinary federal employees, but the partnership that was required to meet that moment was really, I think, the most critical and astounding thing that we accomplished. Building off of that, our zero trust strategy, I knew things had really changed when I went out to RSA and there were, gigantic posters at booths talking about 14028 and zero trust. And that was really being able to see the way that the private sector embraced the policies that we were putting out and then were really partnering with us to execute, I think was really pretty phenomenal. But the individual components, everybody knows, multi-factor authentication, logging, endpoint detection, all of the things that are really the cornerstones of having a safe and secure environment.
Yeah, and you mentioned zero trust as sort of that cornerstone for 14028. As you sort of reflect on the significant cultural and transformational shift that came with that, where are you finding the greatest opportunities for impact? And I say that with the understanding that there has been a lot of progress, and that's been noted because there was a deadline that recently passed. And with that, I know you touted that I think most agencies, at least a significant amount of agencies, really met the kind of charge in meeting those goals.
Absolutely. We were in, for our FY23 FISMA report that we put out in June, I was able to say that almost 90, our federal civilian agencies got to about a 90% range in the 5 cornerstone areas that were identified. But this is the hard part. We are now in the last mile, and the last mile is really, really difficult. These are systems that are old. They are systems that are challenging. We have challenges with our workforce, multiple components of our workforce retiring. We have, I believe the stat's still true, less than 7% of the federal workforce is under the age of 30, right? So we have kind of this seismic change going on within our ecosystem. And this last mile completing the tenets of 14028 and the zero trust are gonna be what's gonna take an enormous amount of our collective effort in getting over the finish line. And then you're never done. As you all know, this is not something that you accomplish. You check a zero trust box and you're done. This is as devices change, as the ecosystem changes. This is work that we have to sustain over time. And that is the most critical part of both a baton pass that as administrations change, that we are making sure that we are setting the best table for the next team to come in and be able to continue this work.
Yeah. One of the things that, it's great, there's the policy, the mandates that came from that, but often those go unfunded. One way in which, people are looking to make some of the progress in zero trust and cybersecurity modernization is the TMF. I know you've been very a big advocate and proponent for that, but tell me about the sort of role that that's played and how that will continue to play a role in sustaining this progress.
Yeah, thank you for that. This is why I brought my notes, because I wanted to share with you all some of the metrics about the success of TMF. When when I joined the administration, the TMF had been in existence for several years, wonderful team, doing really great IT modernization work. When we received the $1 billion from the American Rescue Plan, there were 3 full-time employees at GSA running the entire TMF. So we had to scale up really fast, but we wanted to do it really deliberately. Have a wonderful board, including 3 cyber experts on the TMF board. And so since 2021, the Biden-Harris administration has invested $935 million in 56 projects across 34 agencies. 92% of this funding has helped to address cybersecurity needs across the federal ecosystem. The TMF board has invested over $860 million in 45 projects that help address immediate security gaps and elevate the foundational cybersecurity of our federal agencies. So this is my call out to all of you in the audience. Goldie continues to do an extraordinary job convening all of you and really sharing the partnership between the private sector and our federal ecosystem. But what has to happen, we can't fund cybersecurity and we can't fund IT in the challenging environment that we are in when our funding is not meeting the speed that agencies need to remediate challenges that they have. So CRs, these long budget processes are really challenging for us in the IT and cyber community. So my ask to all of you, and I constantly do a shout out to our colleagues in Congress, to fund the TMF. We need to be nimble. We need to be able to invest when we have urgent issues, if we find things in the supply chain that need to be ripped and replaced. It is essential that we have agile funding that is available to federal agencies, overseen by a board that manages projects in the most meaningful way. We check them up front, we look at the technical architecture, we make sure the vendor contracts are in place, we make sure the personnel is capable at the agency, we fund, and then we manage on a quarterly basis. We change as milestones change. So my ask to every vendor and everybody in this audience, if you have an opportunity to speak to anyone in Congress, please encourage them to fund the TMF. If we don't have these levers available to agencies, we will continue to be challenged. And you heard from Director Coker, the threat environment we're in is extraordinary. So please be an advocate for TMF. We will continue to improve the process to make sure that we can meet the need of agencies. But that's my real clarion call as I depart my role as federal CIO soon. Please make sure that you set up the federal ecosystem for success in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a clear job, everybody. You hear that? Well, Claire, thank you so much. We're out of time. I'm sure we can go on much longer, but I think you ended it perfectly. So thank you. Appreciate it. Let's give her a round of applause.
Thanks, everyone.
A fitting way to end the day, my conversation with Mike Duffy explored zero trust progress, the intersection of AI and cyber, and much more. Let's now go to that fireside chat with Mike Duffy. So nice to meet you, and thanks for joining us at CyberTalks.
Great to be here, Billy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Mike just transferred over from CISA to the acting federal CISO role, so he's got a great level of insight into federal cybersecurity. Let's dive right in because we don't have a ton of time, but would love to, as I mentioned, I talked to Claire this morning sort of about the accomplishments. Now let's look ahead a bit into 2025. Where do you see Fed cyber policy going as we sort of round the corner into next year and a new administration?
Right. Thank you, Billy, for the invite. Great to see everyone here at CyberTalks. I will start by saying that as we look at the cyber threat landscape right now, it has become too broad, too complex, too interconnected right now for an individual agency, really any individual organization, to confront these risks alone. So the policy stance that I think we carry into the new year is one of kind of unified effort. I think that's an important term that we use in OMB in my prior role at CISA. That collective cyber defense mantra is so important because if you think of everything from supply chain to engaging with industry to ensuring that we understand our risk profile, our susceptibility to the threat environment, it is important that we're doing this as one cohesive unit, one team to make sure that we're addressing it as one. With that, I think you mentioned what's coming next with policy. I'll look at where we've been with policy over the last several years, really. And they fall into three categories that I think will continue into the way that we develop policy into the future. The first is setting a foundational governance structure across government and across this community to ensure that we have a general understanding of what to do, not on individual risks or issues, but broadly how are decisions made? How are we taking in information? Consider things like the artificial intelligence executive order and the follow-on policies. Think of the secure software development work that we've done to date. These are new structures across government that identify and outline what we need to do as federal agencies to move the ball forward to reduce risk. The second is really advancing the critical work that ends up being stepping stones to a long-term sustained strategy. For that, think of the zero trust strategy. Think of starting with phishing resistance multi-factor authentication into modern encryption. This begins that cycle, that life cycle of what it will take us through policy into the foreseeable future. And the final one is making good on our investments over time. We're about a decade into the continuous diagnostics and mitigation program. It is time for us to truly operationalize those investments, look at the expanded authorities through agencies like CISA, and ensure that we have greater network visibility, greater enterprise level visibility so that we can counter threats. Not just detect them, but respond to them as a community, as a government, in a more cohesive, coordinated way. That's an important shift forward. Those three areas of governance, starting a strategy and moving it through that long-term strategy and finding a way that we can capitalize on the investments that we've made to date, all critically important as we move forward into 2025.
That's a great top-level policy approach. Thinking from the opposite, from the agency level, what are or should agencies be focusing on as they move into 2025 regarding cyber?
Right, we had a fantastic meeting recently. We brought together the Federal CIO Council and the Federal CISO Council, had a joint meeting to have a discussion of what's coming next. What are we seeing down the pike that you can go back to your teams and have meaningful discussions about where your cyber strategy is going. It was great to hear from agencies the advancements that they're making across enterprise and operational visibility. It was great to hear how modernization of secure operations centers is continuing to keep pace, especially with artificial intelligence, especially with the way that we're deploying vulnerability management tools. That was great to hear. And there were four things that we discussed as, please take note, federal CIOs and CISOs, let's see these through in 2025. The first one is sustaining zero trust. I think you're all familiar with the fact that the original federal zero trust strategy, the deadlines came to an end at the end of the last fiscal year. We at OMB set forth a policy memorandum in the midsummer saying sustain these efforts through your budget, through your resourcing into 26 and beyond. It is that important for us to make this investment for the future. It's something that we need to consider. How do we move from the principles of zero trust into actually modern architectures? How are we maturing our deployments as they stand to make sure that we're keeping pace with the adversary? The second area was that operational visibility. Take advantage of the investments that you've made through CDM and other programs, gain visibility across your environments, and make a difference, make an impact, reduce risk individually so that across the government we have visibility as the threat actor moves. The third is hardening secure cloud environments, making sure that we leverage things like CISA's Secure Cloud Business Applications program, something that I often speak to because it's so easy, as CISA has been working with industry to find secure baselines, to heighten the baseline, providing that not only to federal agencies, but across the board. This is openly available to all. The SCUBA project, as they call it, allows you to take a look at what is available for Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace and see if you're on pace with what is a heightened baseline. The third is quantum readiness. I think that's already been discussed earlier in this session today, but it's critically important for agencies to be thoughtful about their inventories, how they are planning for the migration of their critical systems to PQC, considering what the future holds and what next steps may be.
And just as a closer, I know we're running short on time, but AI is a very top of mind for everyone, and it's intersecting with the cyber community. How does that fit into the policy landscape and or just federal cybersecurity?
Right. During Cybersecurity Awareness Month, I think I've been on every panel where we exclusively talk about artificial intelligence and cybersecurity because it is so top of mind for all of us in this room. I'd say, and I will continue to say, it's the opportunity for us to optimize our cyber defense practices. This is critical because we've come to this point. Everything that I mentioned about the series of policies that we've issued to date, it comes to a head when we think about what we can do to automate those processes, what we can do to make best use of technology to gain the advantage. And that's an important component. It's optimizing the processes that we currently have as we consider what next steps may be. Data is, of course, central to that. And I would like to mention that OMB, in working with the Federal CISO Council and the Federal Chief Data Officers Council, is about to release in the next day a federal zero trust data security guide that's an important step forward for both councils working together from the data side and the security side, tackling something that is critically important for artificial intelligence and vital for zero trust maturation, which is how do we identify and secure data? It is one of the pillars in the zero trust maturity model that has always been a challenge for large organizations. It is something that we as a government now have a good way to wrap our arms around it through this guide. This was forecasted in 2022 as we thought through that policy for zero trust, that this guide would be important at this particular moment, and we're excited to have that out.
Something to look forward to. Mike, we could talk about so much more, I'm sure, but we're out of time. Thank you so much. This has been great. Great insights. For more on federal cybersecurity, visit fedscoop.com. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Daily Scoop podcast, available on all podcast platforms. If you've already rated the podcast on your platform of choice, thanks so much. High ratings and good reviews of the show help more people to find it. The Daily Scoop podcast is a production of the Scoop News Group in Washington, D.C. Adam Butler and Carlin Fisher help put the show together, and the entire Scoop News Group team contributes. We'll be back tomorrow with more top headlines. Until then, I'm your host, Billy Mitchell. Thanks so much for listening.